All right, good morning, everybody. Oh, for a rainy day, that was some good energy for the room. So. Great. Well, welcome to our Safe System Approach track session on I Can Drive 10 miles over the speed limit, interventions and strategies to prevent speeding. I'm Stephen Heiny. I'm with the University of North Carolina's Highway Safety Research Center, and happy to present this panel for you all this morning. Sort of by way of introduction, want to reorient you. I'm sure we've all seen this wheel multiple times this week and at other Lifesavers and other conferences, but we're looking today at safer speeds as part of the wider safe system approach. And a couple things to sort of highlight and emphasize here is that it's not just a piece of the wheel. Sometimes we look at this wheel and think of them as disparate approaches or separate pieces, but really safer speeds works in conjunction with the other parts of the wheel. So what you'll hear from our presenters today is how safer speeds is, of course, part of delivering safer roads and how designing safer roads can lead to safer speeds. It works with safer people and also safer vehicles, how we can design vehicles to make sure they go below or at the speed limit. Another piece of the safe system wheel that I think is really important to emphasize is, again, it's not just the pieces on the inside, but it's really built around the principles on the outside. And the foundation of the safe system approach really relies on these principles. At the top is, probably the most principle, or what this is all based on, is that death and serious injuries are unacceptable. So as we're talking about safer speeds, we're talking about how we can use controlling speed, managing speed, lowering speed limits, all the efforts in our toolbox to make sure that we're operating at speeds where we're eliminating the option or the chance of death and serious injuries in the event of a crash. And that's understanding that humans make mistakes. So when we're thinking about speeds, it's lowering speeds helps to reduce or increase reaction time, stopping time, so that in the event of a mistake, we're not leading to a crash. And if that crash occurs, we're not having a crash that is going to lead to death or serious injury. Understanding that humans are vulnerable, that we're dealing with forces of energy or what a human body can tolerate in the event of a crash, and all relies on managing speed, so we keep that below that threshold that leads to death or serious injury. And the last piece I want to highlight here is working in a system with redundancy. So speed is just another piece of those layers of protection that we're trying to build in there, so that if something in the system fails, if the design fails, something with the vehicle fails, if a human makes a mistake, we're still not leading to a death or serious injury because we've built in those layers of protection. Speed is one of those, but these other elements work with it in the safe system approach. I've got a QR code up here that links to the US DOT's Safe System Approach website to their Safe Speeds page. So it's got a variety of information and resources that are up available from the US Department of Transportation. So I encourage you to look at those to learn more about how Safe Speeds fits into the safe system approach. But I want to turn it over to our panel. So we have two speakers here. We were supposed to have a third who wasn't able to be with us today. So this may be a shorter panel. We'll have loads of time for questions if you have it, or we may end up a little bit early today. But I'll read both of their bios, and then we'll let them take the stage. So first we'll have Laura Keenan. She is the co-founder of Families for Safe Streets in San Diego, a group supporting those affected by traffic collisions and advocating for safer streets, vehicles, and speeds. After her husband, Matt, was killed by a wrong-way driver in 2021, Laura became a passionate advocate for road safety, bringing the World Day of Remembrance for road traffic victims to San Diego and securing funding for safer streets. She serves on the National Executive Committee of Families for Safe Streets and on the board of the San Diego County Bicycle Coalition, advocating at local, state, and federal levels. Laura holds a BA from Claremont McKenna College and an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Business. Oops. And second, we have Julia Griswold. Julia Griswold is director of the UC Berkeley Safe Transportation Research and Education Center and associate director of the Center for Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety, a Tier 1 university transportation center supported by USDOT and led by the University of New Mexico. Her current research focuses on implementation of the safe system approach in the U.S. and how the framework can be used to improve pedestrian and bicyclist safety, speed management, and road safety management programs. I'll now turn it over to Laura.
Thanks for the introduction, Stephen, and thank you everybody for being here today. I really appreciate it. As Stephen said, I'm Laura Keenan, co-founder of Families for Safe Streets San Diego. And Families for Safe Streets, we are an organization comprised of individuals who have lost loved ones to traffic collisions, have survived crashes ourselves, or cared for people who have experienced crashes. We have a two-part mission, both advocacy and support, and we work to prevent the epidemic of traffic crashes and injuries in the U.S. because, as we all know, they are preventable, and we have the tools to stop these crashes. We tend to focus on more upstream solutions to prevent the crash from happening, so those include safe speeds, safe streets, and safe vehicles. And within that, we prioritize the most vulnerable road users, specifically pedestrians and cyclists, because we know that if we make the streets and vehicles safer for those people, it will be safer for everyone, including drivers. Just to give you a little more background on Families for Safe Streets, we have about 20 chapters in the U.S. Spread across the country. We're continuing to grow, so if anybody's interested in, becoming a new chapter, or we also have individual ambassadors out there for areas that don't have their own chapter. There's lots of opportunities to share your story and advocate for safer streets. As Stephen said, I started the Families for Safe Streets chapter in San Diego after my husband, Matt, was killed trying to bike to the movies when he was just 42 years old. He was a new father to our then 15-month-old son, Evan, who you can see in these photos. Matt was an extremely passionate person. When he got excited about something, he made everybody want to say yes. You can see just his passion exuding out of these photos. He and Evan had an incredible bond at even such an early age. He loved to play songs to Evan, make up silly lyrics, and Evan just couldn't get enough. You can see he's just entranced in that top right photo. Matt was an extremely caring person. He was a physical therapist and took pride in helping others. And we thought we were just getting started, but we weren't. The day that he was killed, we had just put our son Evan to bed, and Matt took the opportunity as a new parent to get a little exercise and downtime and decided he was going to ride his bicycle to the movies. And I found out that about 15 minutes after he left our house, a wrong-way driver crossed into his painted bike lane and hit him head-on, going at least 35 miles per hour. He was doing everything right. He had his helmet on. He had crazy bright lights. They would blind you when you would see them. But the driver never saw him. She didn't hit the brakes, and she hit him going about 35 miles per hour. I found out the next morning, and I had to tell Evan, I had to get him out of his crib and tell him his dad was never coming home again. And I knew from that moment on that, one, his death was preventable, and two, I needed to do everything in my power to prevent this from happening to somebody else. I didn't know a lot about traffic safety at the time, but I quickly learned, and I now know, there were so many ways to prevent Matt's death. Had there been a protected bike lane there to slow that driver down so that impact wasn't as lethal, he would likely be alive. Had that street design been less straight to prevent her from going deadly speeds, he'd likely be alive. Had that speed limit been lower, not 35 miles per hour, but 25 miles per hour, his chance of survival would have been 90%. But that wasn't the case, and so we worked to try to share our stories. All of our members have similar stories, unfortunately. As you guys know, there's over 44,000 deaths now in the U.S. every year, traffic crashes, and there's a lot of families who unfortunately share this story. And we share our stories because we know that stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. So we really work to combine our stories with the facts to break through. We know that generates empathy and people can relate to what we're saying, and unfortunately, put themselves mentally in our shoes, and hopefully that can drive action. And you guys have probably heard this, the term crash, not accident. These are crashes, they're not accidents. We have the tools. Crashes happen as a result of policy decisions, different vehicle and road designs, and we can prevent these from happening, and so therefore we use the term crash, not accident. In the US, as I know you guys also are aware, but just to kind of ground us, we have the highest death rate of motor vehicle crashes compared to 28 high-income countries, including our neighbor of Canada and other countries. Our death rates continue to increase, whereas these other countries are declining. All of these countries have cell phones and other things to distract drivers, but they have solved the problem better than we have, and so we work to combat the complacency around traffic deaths because it doesn't have to happen. And where safe speeds come into play, as Stephen touched on some of these already, but we know that the chance of dying if somebody's hit at 40 miles per hour is about 46%, and that drops more than half at 30 miles per hour to 20%. And when you're at 20 miles per hour, it drops another even more than half to 8%. But not only that, as people are driving faster, their field of vision is reduced. It takes them longer to react, longer to brake, and so one of our areas in Families for Safe Streets that we really have been focusing on is trying to fight against speeds. We've done a bunch in this area, so Families for Safe Streets as a national organization was founded in New York City, and their first win was reducing speed limits within New York City to 25 miles per hour. They were able to do that within their first year, incredibly. And they continue to do a lot at the New York State level to reduce speeds. In California, as many of you probably know, AB 43 was passed about a year and a half ago, probably, which gave local municipalities the ability to reduce speed limits without having to follow the 85th percentile rule. And in our chapter in San Diego, have been doing a lot in this area. We have been trying to get the city of San Diego to reduce the speed limits in business districts as well as school zones. We're still working on that, but we just got announced that they're going to reduce speed limits in 17 key corridors within the city, so take that as a win, but there's definitely more to go. And then, of course, we've also been involved in the California Speed Camera Pilot Program, which is currently active in now 6 cities in California, and we're working to try to get this into other cities across California, too. And then safe roads is also another way to manage speed. This is an example of a complete street where if we build the streets for all road users, buses, pedestrians, cyclists, we know that it slows people down. When there's painted crosswalks, drivers see that and they slow down. It breaks up the just black asphalt. And so we work on different ways to try to implement safe streets across the country. To give you an example, in San Diego, we recently were able to get we call it the Fatal 15 Most Dangerous Intersections funded in San Diego. We actually use SafeTREC data to identify the most fatal 15 intersections in the city and advocated to get those fixed using quick build solutions. So these are things that can be done quickly and affordably and very fast as well. We asked for $1.5 million to fix all fatal 15 intersections, and we're able to get those in last year's budget. And you can see here, this is a rally that Families for Safe Streets San Diego did with all of our loved ones' pictures at one of the most fatal intersections. And implementing crosswalks, painted striped crosswalks, signal, sound, curb extensions, using modular technology. All of that is super affordable and will slow people down and prevent if a crash were to occur, the lethality of it. And then safe vehicles. Right now, we've been focusing a lot on intelligent speed assist. There are, on the next slide I'll cover it, but it's a really wonderful way to take drivers out of the equation and use the vehicle technology to prevent crashes from happening. There's 3 different types of intelligent speed assist. The first one is fixed, and this is where a vehicle will have a mechanism in place to prevent their vehicle from exceeding a certain speed limit, say 80 miles per hour. This existed for a long time. A lot of big rig trucks have that, for example. And so therefore, you know that a vehicle is not going to exceed a certain number or certain speed limit. There's passive. This would alert drivers when they're exceeding a speed limit. This is often installed at the manufacturer level. There was a bill just last year, SB 961, I believe, that was trying to pass this. It got pretty far, but didn't ultimately pass. But there was a lot of driver support for this because people like to know if they're exceeding the speed limit, if nothing else, to avoid a ticket. And then there's active, and this is a device that would prevent somebody from exceeding the speed limit. There's a map component that's installed so it's smart and knows, at this street, the speed limit is 25 miles per hour or whatever. And so there's all different ways to prevent speeding. And what we've been really focusing on is a super speed bill at a multi-state level. So this is modeled after the ignition interlock devices for drunk driving, and it would be active intelligent speed assist. The idea here is for repeat speed offenders or people who have been driving recklessly, say 25 miles above the speed limit, they would be required to install an ISA device in their vehicle to prevent them from speeding. This is instead of taking away somebody's license. We know that people who have had their license revoked, 75% of them still drive on the road, so it's not solving the problem. But this will prevent people from speeding and still allow them to get around, go to school, work, and be able to contribute to society. Also, it reduces police harm. Police are not in the way of these speeders. They don't have to chase them. It creates a safer environment for everyone. And we've gotten a lot of bipartisan support on these bills too, so we're very excited about that. And right now you can see we just were able to get a bill passed in Washington, D.C., and then there are currently 7 other bills across the country, all very similar, focused around these super speeders. And we're looking to try to introduce more bills at state levels. Ideas, if we can get enough states to pass this, then we get to a tipping point where the federal legislation would come on board, and then we can get it more broadly as well. So if you guys are interested in trying to bring that forward, we have a lot of infrastructure in place to try to help you at this point, so let me know. And then I also wanted to touch on, as I said earlier, Families for Safe Streets, it has a 2-part mission, advocacy and support is a really big piece of it too. I'm sure many of you guys come across people who have been affected by traffic violence, and it can be intimidating, and you want to help them, but you don't know how, and so our organization, as well as a lot of other similar peer organizations out there, offer support services. And a lot of our support is virtual, so people don't have to be in a specific area. We do online support monthly. We also have peer mentoring for people who have had similar crash experiences. I can tell you firsthand, there's nothing like knowing somebody who's had a similar experience, and it creates this sense of bond, as well as it's such an isolating experience, and when you meet somebody who's gone through it, it really it's so comforting. And then also, after a crash, there's so much chaos, and you don't know even where to start, so we offer logistical assistance and just a checklist of post-crash care. And then I wanted to also touch on our story map. One of our efforts, as I said, is really to fight the complacency around traffic deaths. Unfortunately, a lot of people just take traffic crashes for granted. They think it's an outcome of our society, a driving society, but it doesn't have to be, as we all know. And so we've started this story map where anybody, this is a QR code, can go in and mark where their crash occurred or their loved one's crash occurred and put a picture up and write a brief bio. And it's extremely powerful. This is not the best snapshot, but when you look at the whole country and you see all these red dots everywhere, it really hits home that this is happening not just somewhere else, it's in our neighborhood. And we're gonna try to use this at all levels, whether it's trying to get bills across, trying to talk to your local neighbor, just really trying to fight that complacency. So I encourage you to add your story, share this with people you know who have been in crashes, and try to help fight that complacency. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura, for giving some good grounding about why this work is so important. So I know my title is not very exciting or maybe ambitious sounding, but I think State of California has done some really good work on moving towards more safe system aligned approach to speed management and setting speed limits. So I'm going to talk about some of the policy work that's been done and then the follow-up steps to support that. So I don't need to say a whole lot here because I think even Laura had one of the same graphics in her presentation. But the really important part of the safe system approach that isn't explicitly described in the FHWA wheel with the elements and the principles is that it's all about kinetic energy. And from the kinetic energy equation that there's an exponential relationship between speed and kinetic energy. So the crash forces are disproportionately affected by the speed of the vehicles involved in a crash. And over the last 10 years or so, about 25% of fatalities in California have been involved speed as a primary crash factor, and I think it's closer to 30% if you look at the other associated factors. So that's the where speed was maybe a contributing factor to the severity, but not to the necessarily to the crash occurring. So our problem in California, and I think much of the US, is that we're required to use the 85th percentile approach to set speed limits. So even if there's a road where we know there are vulnerable road users and that the speeds are inappropriate for the people using that road, we're reliant on driver behavior. And so this is something that was acknowledged several years ago in California, and the Assembly passed a bill called AB 2363 that called for the California State Transportation Agency to convene a zero traffic fatalities task force and look at how speed was a factor in the increasing fatalities and serious injuries in the state, and what could be done to improve the speed limit setting methodology to help reduce that disturbing trend. So in 2018, that bill was passed, and then in 2019, CalSTA convened the task force, and then in 2020, they issued their report of findings, which included recommendations to change the way speed limits were set in the state. And then in the following 2 years, there were two bills that were passed. So Laura mentioned AB 43, and the following year, AB 1938, added some clarifications. And so both of those bills created some new flexibility to reduce speed limits, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those. And then some additional context is that Caltrans adopted the safe system approach as their framework for achieving their Vision Zero goal in 2022. So the Zero Traffic Fatalities Task Force, their report of findings had a number of topic areas that they discussed, and their findings and recommendations were related to establishing speed limits, engineering approaches, enforcement, and education. And I'm going to mostly focus on the speed limit portion of that. So short-term recommendations, and these maybe are a little wonky. So they wanted to increase the speed limit reduction allowance on high injury networks and locations with vulnerable road users. So this is, considering the context of the types of users on the road, and if there are pedestrians and bicyclists known to be present, then we want to have some more flexibility to reduce, an additional 5 miles per hour, say, below the 85th percentile speed. They also recommended adding additional prima facie speed limits for business activity districts, and then creating more flexibility to reduce those prima facie speed limits in school zones and some other special zones, like for seniors. And then they also wanted to allow for a traffic survey to retain the existing speed limit. So this sometimes there have been issues with speed creep, where you do a traffic survey, your 85th percentile is slightly higher than the previous speed, you increase that, and then drivers then compensate, oh, I can go a little over that, and your following survey is going to then increase the speed limit again, and that's not something that most communities want. So AB 43 addressed all of those recommendations. So they also had just a general purpose of adding additional flexibility in speed limit setting for common context-sensitive zones. Then they extended the validity period of engineering and traffic surveys. So this was a challenge for a lot of local jurisdictions in the state. At the time, I believe they had 7 years during which a survey would be valid. And once that expired, they could no longer enforce those speed limits. And then they wanted to exempt certain context-sensitive zones from speed limits based on the 85th percentile. So this is, adding more of those zone types. So to support AB 43, the SHSP for California had 2 action items. So there was one from the pedestrian challenge area focused on making a decision maker and stakeholder education toolkit. And then the speed management and aggressive driving challenge area had an action focused on technical assistance and resources. So these were combined into one project. So this particular, the wording of this speed management and aggressive driving action was actually taken directly from the Zero Traffic Fatalities Task Force report. So these actions were combined into a single contract with my center, and this was called the Safe Speeds T3 project. And so those Ts are, we developed a Safe Speeds toolkit for decision maker and community stakeholders, and that included this flow chart on the right, which shows the logic for choosing speeds on roads in the state after AB 43 and AB 1938, and it is pretty complicated now. So this this toolkit was really needed. The second T was the toolkit user training, and through this we recorded a webinar that's available on our website. And then pilot technical assistance on speed limit setting practice. So we wanted to work with some cities that were big enough to have the staff to attend our training and be able to implement the changes, but not so big that they had the resources to do this all without us. So the purpose of this project was to develop an accessible guide for provisions under these two new bills, and then help cities take advantage of new flexibilities to reduce the speed limits. And then we were addressing those two SHSP actions. So this is just a screenshot of the website, and there's a QR code if you'd like to check out the site. So there's sections just talking about why speed limits are important, the evidence about the effect that speed limit changes have on behavior, and then a pretty thorough description in more layman's terms about what the current speed limit setting law is. And then summary and next steps is where that flowchart is, and that's the part I'm most excited about from this project. And then also there's the recording of the webinar. So this was the agenda for the webinar, and we conducted the same trainings as a trial to sort of refine it before doing the webinar. So we did the training with the two pilot cities that we worked with. We had one in the Central Valley and then one in the Inland Empire. So it reviewed the importance of setting speed limits. It gave the context with federal and state legislation, talking about the MUTCD and the other limitations that we're working with when setting speed limits. The next steps for jurisdictions interested in lowering speed limits. We had a live tour of the site, and then audience Q&A. So for the pilot technical assistance, so we did some gathering of materials beforehand so we could give the best advice possible to the communities. So we asked them to identify corridors that they thought had speeding problems. We had them share their engineering and traffic surveys. We did a survey of their staff, and we asked them to bring at least one engineer, planner, and law enforcement representative to the trainings, and that was actually really helpful, in particular having the law enforcement representation, because they really knew a lot more about where the speeding problems were. And then we also reviewed their local road safety plans and the speed-related crash data for the community. So after we conducted the training, we did the field observation of the corridors, and we had a traffic engineering expert who was actually a member of the Zero Traffic Fatalities Task Force there to, so I'm a researcher, so I understand this work, but I am not an expert at actually setting speed limits, so it was very important that we had a practitioner there with deep expertise on the topic to advise the cities. And if you're interested in that sort of nitty-gritty, one of my colleagues presented in the pedestrian session on safe speeds yesterday morning, so you can check out her presentation. And then we developed a technical assistance plan for the cities for how they can move forward, and shared with them a spreadsheet of citywide recommendations. So that's the sort of short-term speed limit setting changes that have been made so far. And then I think more importantly, there was a longer-term recommendation that the state develop and implement a new roadway-based context-sensitive approach to setting speed limits that prioritizes the safety of all road users, and They wanted this approach to be based on how the street is used and by whom, how protected non-motorized users are from vehicles, how likely it is that there will be a conflict between vehicles and other street users, and how likely it is that a collision will result in a fatal or serious injury. And I'll just remind you about kinetic energy, and this is, none of this is explicitly saying anything about the safe system approach, but when we talk about kinetic energy and looking at the work done in other parts of the world related to kinetic energy, they're looking at reducing any of exposure, likelihood, and severity. So if you can get any of those to zero, your kinetic energy problem is gone. So I think this was a really nice way of describing what our vision is for speed limit setting. And so I guess I should mention, I'm currently working with Caltrans on developing that new approach to setting speed limits. So it's based more on road typology and risk minimization for the users that would use a given road type, and less on driver behavior. And then I'll just say a tiny bit about additional work in progress. So the feds updated the MUTCD in late 2023, and so California needs to incorporate those updates into the state MUTCD, and that does include some new flexibility to include context and less focus on the 85th percentile approach. As Laura mentioned, there was the speed safety camera legislation that was passed a couple years ago, and then this last year, Malibu was added to the 6 pilot cities. So we're eagerly watching what happens with that and hopeful that that pilot program can be made permanent and statewide. Another one of the recommendations from the report was to develop a speed-related safety monitoring program, and that's something that we're working on with Caltrans. And then California Office of Traffic Safety has funded our ongoing program called the Complete Streets Safety Assessment Program, and this year we are incorporating the technical assistance from the Safe Speeds project, so that we'll be able to continue providing support on speed limit setting to agencies throughout the state. And that's all I have. There's a QR code again for the toolkit, and yeah, I'm ready for questions.
All right. Thank you to Laura and Julia for great presentations. If we have any questions, I've got a mic. I can come and find you. I'll note this is being recorded, so if you do have a question, want to make sure you're speaking into the mic so we capture that, and also so everyone can hear. So any questions? Yes.
More for Dr. Griswold. So I'm your neighbor in Sacramento. The city jumped on doing the AB 43 like right away out of the gate. And and this is more commentary, I suppose, and there might be a question involved as well. One of the problems was law enforcement was not involved in any of the conversations whatsoever in regards to some of the changes. So they did their planning essentially behind the scenes. And it's not to say we don't have a great relationship. Our engineering department is like, we regularly meet, but they never brought this up at all. So they implemented 15 roadway speed changes, which in theory, we support those, of course. However, there were multiple locations where they brought the prima facie speed limit down to that minimum at 15 miles per hour in 2 locations, and then 20 miles per hour in 5 other locations. The problem that we ran into was that in the survey, the traffic survey, it was not particularly detailed in terms of the description to say why 15 miles per hour or 20 miles per hour is different than 25. So a handful of citations were written in these areas because we were kind of excited about it, like, let's write some tickets. So we do that, and so we write a 30 mile per hour ticket in a 15 mile per hour zone where it once was 25, and that case was lost in court. The officer did a really good job explaining on their end. However, the survey was missing enough criteria on the judicial side for this judge to go, I'll happily write the first, find the first judgment against somebody in Sacramento County. But there just wasn't enough on that survey, and I think that's what the judge kind of pointed to. Is that something you've experienced? And I think some of the lessons learned here is really involving law enforcement, not just, and you mentioned involving law enforcement from a identify locations aspect, but also from the point of we're the ones doing the enforcement, and gladly, but we also are the ones that are in the hot seat that are gonna write this ticket. We have to present this to a judge, and then we don't get that judicial support, so to speak. And so there might be another layer too of getting the judges on board, or commissioners in our case in Sacramento as well, where they're just not knowledgeable in kind of the why. And it'd be great for all the judges across the state of California to come to something like this and go reinvest in that a little bit more. But anyways, I'm curious if you had some experience in that or any thoughts to what I had to say on that.
So it's not something I'm specifically that familiar with, but when we did our technical assistance, our expert, we had Rock Miller, who some of you may have heard of. He's local here, local-ish. So he did advise on the language to use in the ET&S to make sure that it was defensible in court, and that is definitely an important consideration for how you describe any of your prima facie or statutory speed limits. So it's an important point. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Excuse me.
I have a quick question about the super speeder legislation that you were talking about. I work in Nevada. One of our big problems there, especially in the Las Vegas Valley, that court system gets so backlogged that even, significant speed citations that come in there often get reduced to non-moving violations, parking violations. So tracking somebody that now is, down the road with multiple speed violations is extremely difficult. With the states that have either implemented or proposing it, is there some stipulation that's in that legislation that addresses that you know of?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer. I could definitely find out if we want to exchange contact information. I hadn't thought about that, but I'm sure it's addressed in there. I just am not as familiar enough with the individual state bills to be able to answer it right now. I'll definitely get back to you on that.
Okay, any other questions? To the front.
Good morning. Kevin Shin with California Walks. Thank you both for presenting all of this great information and sharing with us all of these resources. And I feel like a lot of these resources really are kind of geared towards or addressing more kind of the municipal side of things and really the cities and encouraging them to set speed limits. But a big part of the problem is obviously culture amongst our drivers. So how do we take some of these resources and reframe them in a way that allows for regular drivers and for people like us to be able to put that in front of somebody and put that in front of, say, like a community and ask them to adhere to the speed limits, not just expect them to do it without being given some good information?
That actually was one of the other recommendations from the Zero Traffic Fatalities report, was to have some statewide education campaigns about the importance of speed
and the safety problems with that. I think the Safe Speeds toolkit that we produced was intended to be accessible to non-practitioners as well. I'm not sure how well it did that, but it was not written by traffic engineers.
And I would say, we, in Families for Safe Streets and victim survivor advocacy groups, we always try to humanize the story and take away the conversation from just the statistics and bring it to life. And so that allows the common person to relate more. It's more grassroots efforts, but like one campaign that we did in San Diego was put up signs across the city at 90 fatal crash sites that said your neighbor was killed here and slow down and stuff like that. So it draws attention to the individual, and I try to emphasize as much as possible, like every mile per hour matters, because most people think if I exceed the speed limit by 5 miles per hour, it doesn't matter, but it really does. And so really trying to bring it back down to it's saving lives as much as possible. And whenever we're in some sort of community or committee setting, that's what we try to communicate.
And did you all participate in this? I know here the Families for Safe Streets Southern California did Rainbow Halos. Did you all do that as well? Or
That's more of the Los Angeles chapter's initiative. So in San Diego, we haven't done that as much, but that's another way, right? It's just to try to mark where crashes have happened and to bring that awareness, and then try to let people know like what you do as an individual actually matters. It's not just a big nebulous problem.
I'm John Lauer. I'd like to follow up on the first question regarding what do the courts need to make it enforceable. I've worked with Rock Miller, your expert, a lot over the years. He would serve as our expert witness for litigation. And what I always learned from him was what do the courts want to see? That is, the more local the data is collected and the more current the data is collected. So I don't know what he put in there, but what I would hope he has is data on existing, have it like on a go-forward basis. Maybe it's something that's updated to provide vulnerable road user exposure, counts of pedestrians and bicyclists in this area, as well as vehicle speed variance. I think those are the two keys, and if you dig into the data of the documents you talk about on the safe system approach for speed management, it says let's identify the harmful speed locations. And those are the two criteria that go into identifying them.
AB 43 actually gives a lot of flexibility in the pedestrian and bicyclist exposure part, because they don't expect people or cities to actually collect the count data to justify the change in speed limits. So there's a number of infrastructure types that, if present, will trigger that vulnerable road user portion allowance.
Any other questions? I'll have a couple to keep us going. So this one's for Laura. Approaching a crash victim or a crash family about advocacy can be intimidating. Many people don't want to say the wrong thing. Do you have any guidance on how to do this and what to say?
Yeah, definitely. And I know there's a lot of law enforcement people out here in particular, and I know you guys are coming across people probably daily who have been in crashes. I would say it is hard. Even for me, it's hard to start that conversation with somebody because everybody manages grief differently and is ready to talk about it at different times. But I would encourage you to have that conversation. It's really an opportunity for people to pour this pain into purpose. For me, it's been incredibly healing to be able to talk about Matt and my story. It's a way that I get to honor him almost weekly. and try to make sure that he didn't die in vain. I think there's sometimes sensitivity around like exploiting people's family or people's stories. But just know that people really do want to talk about their person or their story themselves because it's on their mind whether you bring it up or not. And I would say, one good way to open that conversation could be from the support angle. As I said, our organization has a lot of support services, so you could broach that topic with the support side of it and then leave it up to our organization to talk about the advocacy when and if it's right for that person. Because somebody can be part of our group and not do advocacy too. They can just be there to meet other people and have that support.
Thank you. Any other questions in the crowd? All right, well, let's give our panelists one more round of applause. Thank you very much.